Alright, I'm going to start up. Today we're going to go over Chapter 8. My guess is it'll take somewhere in the area of an hour. And then I sent you some emails. Don't worry about them now. We'll talk about them later. I get a lot of different stuff online. Part of it's from being an instructor. Sometimes I just answer stuff because it sounds interesting. But this year, one of the class that you guys are going to take a year from now is being totally redone this semester. All right, we're using a different language. It's being done totally differently. And literally, the guy who was teaching it at St. Louis, he got a bunch of training not this past summer, but the summer before that. So he's real comfortable with it. All right, I started learning it in June, so I'm not as comfortable with it. All right, so one of the things I did was I found this site online. It's $5 a month, but they have articles on the topic, and they have other articles too. Some of them are more generic in nature, but I grabbed a couple of them. Hopefully, it's okay that I did that, and I made copies of a couple of those things, and I sent those to you as well. So we'll talk about those a little bit later. All right, so I am at the beginning of Chapter 8. It looks like around page 281. We mentioned this yesterday, but this chapter again is about responsive design. All right, so the plan is that we go over Chapter 8, and then we talk about a few other things afterward. The rest of the period will be lab. So again, from around 9 to 9:30 or so on will be lab. All period tomorrow is lab. All period Monday will be lab. If you're behind, I want you to get caught up. All right? I don't want it where you're sitting there and you're like, yeah, I've been working on this a lot at home at night. I don't want that. Okay? But that's the plan right now. And then Tuesday of next week, we would have a test on chapters 7 and 8. All right? And hopefully that will give you enough time to do the work and get ready for it. Again, I think that I'll go back and look at it before the end of the period today, but I think you'll still be manipulating the portfolio website that you've been working on, to my knowledge. All right. And then, so that'll be Tuesday. Wednesday and Thursday, we'll do it like this week. Wednesday, we'll go over Chapter 9, which is on Flexbox. That lecture will be longer. Kind of warning to you. It'll probably take an hour and a half to 2 hours. Thursday, same thing, CSS Grid. All right. Friday of next week, again, the 18th will be a lab, and probably the following Monday will be a lab. Test again, etc. You get the idea. All right. Okay. So, how to use responsive web design. And as they mentioned in here, in the first 7 chapters in this book, basically they were concerned with getting a website up and out there. And by and large, it was designed to run on either a laptop or a desktop computer. In fact, with most of the stuff we've done thus far, if you brought it up on your phone or you brought it up on a smaller tablet, it would look really junky. All right, so in this chapter, they're going to talk about how to fix that. All right, and notice they'll say that there's 3 basic components of this responsive website design. RWD, or responsive web design, what it means is that whatever it is you're trying to show, it's typically a website, but whatever it is you're trying to show looks good on any kind of medium. Okay? Desktop, laptop, tablet, phone, and in any orientation. All right? Sometimes you'll go and you'll bring up a site and it will look really good on your phone, maybe in landscape, but it looks terrible in portrait, or vice versa. We don't want that. We want it to look good on basically everything. So that's what they get into in here. Again, one of the hallmarks of this, as we talked about this yesterday, is fluid design. And again, fluid design means that when you are working with widths and heights, by and large, you're almost always, if not always, working with percentages. All right? And when you're working on anything else, a paragraph, an H1 header, etc., you're working in M's and Rems. So we're not using pixels, PX. We're not using points, PTs, because those are absolute measurements. We're using relative measurements. And that's one of the hallmarks of being able to do fluid design. So we'll talk about that. Then we'll go into media queries. I've actually given you something that, for lack of better words, I gleaned. I took an online class with this guy that I take some classes from, and I took one of the things he did. He had everything in one file. I broke it up into a couple files. I changed it a little bit, all right, but we're going to look at that afterwards as far as showing you media queries, all right? And then finally, the chapter ends with a web page that uses responsive web design. I would strongly suggest, after we get through with this chapter, if you're still confused, I would bring up the page that's in here. Again, you've got all that stuff. You don't even have to play with it, but just look at it and note how it comes up, and when you shrink the size of your screen, etc., how it still looks nice. All right. I also mentioned this to you the other day, but I'm saying it again. Please look up on the screen. I think you already know this, that I use Chrome. Okay. So if I come in here and I'm just going to grab something, you know what? I'll grab Rankin's website. Okay, so there's Rankin's website in Chrome. No big thing right there. But we've talked about this before. If you hit the F12 function key with it up, that brings up the developer tools. That's right here. You can move these tools around. This is dockable. So if some people like it where instead of being on the bottom like I have it, they have it on the right or on the left, etc., or on the top. You can do that. I'm just going to leave it there. I don't care. The point is, if you go up to the very top and you look way on the top part here, you'll notice the second one over says, where's the first one? Nope, second one. It says Toggle Device Toolbar. All right, and if I click on it, it will then show me, wrong line. It will show me different ways that I can come in here and look at this. And what I mean is, if you look right there, there's how it would look on an iPad Pro. Now I'm going to have to make it bigger, of course, but you get the idea. All right? And here's how it would look on different phones, etc. That stuff is important when you are starting to make stuff responsive, because if it looks great on screen, but you go and you bring it up in one of these devices and it looks terrible, you've got some work to do. That should make sense. All right. Okay. So let's get into it then. Again, as they mentioned back in Chapter 1, they mentioned the term responsive web design. I already said what it is. Okay, it says where you want to maintain the overall look and feel of a site regardless of the medium that you are using to look at it. Okay, so the three components are shown. In fact, let's just go back. They mention them right here. The first one, again, is using fluid design. We already talked about a little bit what that is. You're going to see it some more in here. All right. Second, it's going to involve images whose size maintains its aspect ratio as it changes on different devices. Normally, that involves setting the width to 100%, which means take up 100% of whatever you're being held in, type of an idea. We looked at that with a little bit yesterday. Finally, the last thing is media queries. And media queries are so that you are able to have things work and look nice, act and react, etc., at different sizes. Now, I never tried this before with Rankins, but let's just try it here. So if I come here and I do this, what you should notice when you look is it still looks nice as I'm shrinking it down. And the stuff that before, this stuff was basically laid out in more of a columnar format, different columns. Now it's more in a row format. All right? You're going to learn this in this chapter, and we're going to go into it in more depth in the next chapter, in Chapter 9, when we talk about Flexbox. All right? All right. So again, they show this on here, and it should be nothing new to you. There it is on a laptop, desktop, whatever. There it is on a phone. Now, one thing you may notice is when you put this stuff on a phone, sometimes things aren't shown. For instance, it may not be worth showing this picture on a phone. It may not mean the same thing, etc. It just depends on the site. my guess is if I brought Rankin's site up on my phone, it wouldn't look the same exactly as it does right here. All right. So again, the three components one more time: fluid layout, media queries, scalable images. All right. It says websites that are developed using RWD are designed to adapt gracefully to the size of the screen on which they're displayed. All right. And what does that mean? I'm actually going to show you. I don't know if I have it up right now. I probably don't. I had it up before, but let's see if I've got it here. This is something that we're going to take a look at in just a couple minutes. This is it. There we go. Very little CSS file, 15 lines long. All right, doesn't look like much at all when you bring it up on the screen, but the CSS has media queries in it. What that means is this is what it'll look like on a widescreen device, which means, you know, laptop, full size, and above, whatever that happens to be. All right, but notice as I start to shrink it down, stole a little bit of my own thunder there. All right, what you're going to notice, I'm in landscape mode now. I don't know how I even got there, but I did. So now it's showing the sizes, and when I get out of landscape mode in just a bit, it's going to be different colors as it goes from one size to another size. I did not use the same numbers that they use in the book, because mine's much more generic than what's written in the book. We'll talk about that when we get to that point. All right. So again, they talk about how to test. The best way to test and see how your device will look, or how your website will look on different devices, is to literally bring it up on different devices. Does that make sense? All right. I mean, if you know that you're creating something, and believe me, this kind of thing happens. All right, you get a job for a company, and everyone at the company is issued their own iPhone. All right, and they do a lot of, you know, maybe with a pandemic or whatever, they're doing a lot of their work from home, and they're supposed to use this iPhone. So you want to make sure that you get, as a developer, you get one of those iPhones, and you can test on it, because you want it to look, you want to see exactly what they're going to see. Emulators, like I just showed you, through the Chrome Developer Tools are nice. They're not a cure-all. And sometimes something will look decent on an emulator and it won't look that decent on an actual device. All right. Not only that, you're never sure typically what browser somebody's going to use. I know for iPhones you get Safari by default, but you can download other browsers onto an iPhone as well. All right. So this is what I mentioned to you about clicking that. I already showed you that. So they say 3 ways to test a responsive design. Number 1, deploy your website to a server and test it on each device. There are actually people who make a living. They're called beta testers. All right, and what typically happens is they get sent software, and they might have a bunch of different devices and a bunch of different browsers, etc., and they just test stuff. Kind of a neat job when you think about it. All right, Microsoft, I don't know if they still do it, and to me, Microsoft in some ways, and I'm not a big Microsoft pro guy, but in some ways, they're like the most brilliant company in the world. I don't know if they still do this, but to beta test, they used to charge you. So in other words, if you wanted to test their software, they let you, but you had to pay them to test their software. Now, your payback was typically, if you were one of their testers, when it came out, you got a free copy of it. So it kind of made up for it, okay? But you had to pay them. All right. Use device emulators, I already mentioned that. And use the developer tools provided by most browsers. We started to talk about that as well. And some of these emulators, there's more emulators than what I just showed you right there. You can download emulators. You can go to sites that will basically have emulators in there. And you can pick different versions of different browsers, etc. All right? Okay. So how to display the browser's developer tools, I already showed you that. So how to implement a fluid design. One thing is, one of the first things that you have to do as a web developer, if you're creating the site for somebody and they've got an idea of what they want, typically what you end up doing, and there's tools to do this. I'm gonna give you one later on in the semester. All right, but there are tools that are known as wireframe tools, where you can mock up the way that a website will look. Okay, and you want to work closely with the person or persons you are making the website for to give them what they want. Now, they're very well, and I mentioned this yesterday, there might be times when they tell you, oh, I want this, and you're thinking to yourself, no, you don't. All right? And you can politely tell them, well, what about this? But if they have their mind set on something, then that's what, you know, especially if you're being contracted by them, that's what you do. All right? And one of the things, again, we just mentioned this with fluid design, is you want it to be fluid. You want, no matter what you're, you know, there's a woman, I may have mentioned this to you before, I don't know if I did or not. There is a woman in O'Fallon who has an animal rescue center, all right? And I've been in contact with her. We may each, as a project, or I may have each one of you build basically a website for her, and then let her pick the one that she wants. All right, this is what I've done. And then what we do is, you know, and it's not like there's losers, but she would pick the one that she would want, and then it would say designed by, and it would have your name on it at the bottom. All right, we've done this for the last couple of years, and then the last day of the semester we have literally a pizza party where I bring in some pizzas, and that's kind of how we celebrate. Then you find out who got picked, so to speak. All right, so fluid layouts versus fixed layouts. Now take a look at this picture here, because it's in this section, it's probably the most important part. All right, so notice fixed width 960 pixels, fluid width 90%. And you might look at that and go, what do you mean 90%? What they're saying here is we're using 90% of our screen. So we've got 5% over here we're not using, and 5% over here we're not using. You may want to do that. You may not want to do that. All right, and there's different ways that you can set these fluid types of layouts up. All right, and again, this is why you create, if you're creating something for somebody, you keep them involved in the process right away. All right, typically what happens, because I've done this before where I've created sites for people, and what do you want? I don't know. So you start to give them something. They do a lot better at telling you what they don't want than what they do want. Because a lot of times until they see something on the screen, then they're, oh, now I'm starting to know what I want. I know I want this and I want this. Yeah, what you have there, but I want it over here, etc. All right? But if you'll notice, fixed has got pixels all the way. Fluid has got percentages all the way. And they show you in here how you can convert, on the next page or so, how you can convert from pixels to percentages. All right? But it says here they're proportional to the size of the screen. They are scalable. That's why you want the fluid layout, okay? They can be used without media queries in some cases. Media queries, you're going to see them in just a bit. They're, for lack of better words, they're kind of a pain in the butt. All right? So again, a fixed layout uses absolute measurements. A fluid layout uses percentages. End of story. Okay. So this is the conversion process. So notice what they've done here. Okay, so width 90%, max width is in pixels. Sometimes you do it like this. All right, but what you should notice in here is virtually, not everything, but virtually everything in here, other than that max width, virtually everything else that's in here is done in percentages. All right. So as it says there, to convert the width of an element from a pixel to a percent, divide the width of that element by the width of its parent. 960 is a real popular size. 1024 is a real popular size. 768 is a popular size because typically that's like that's not always, but it depends on how big it is. But 768 quite often can be landscape for a tablet. All right, and they'll give you those numbers in here. They're not exact. All right, it's amazing because, you know, like the new iPads that are out, I think the screen is 10.4 inches or something like that. It's getting pretty much where it's almost a laptop. All right. To limit the width of an element, you can use the max width property. How to use other units of measure with responsive design. We've talked a little bit about these. Some of these you might say, no, I never saw those before. Okay. The one you're probably going to use the most often is the first one listed there. VH means view height. So if I want something, let's say that I want the, let's say that I've got a header, a main section, and a footer. You all with me? All right. I might set the header up to 10 VH and the footer up to 10 VH and the main section up to 80 VH. That means that the header should take 10%, the footer should take 10%, and the main should take 80% of whatever my current view height is. You don't need to put the percent symbol in there. You can just say like 80 VH. All right. There's the same thing with width. And notice there's also a minimum and a maximum. All right. Now, as far as that goes too, let's see if I still have this up here. I don't know if I do or not. Let's see. Something I'm working on for the other class, but yeah, this will be fine. All right. Hopefully you remember this thing right here. All right. That's what we're talking about right now. That's what this chapter is about. Your viewport is whatever you are using to currently look at what you're looking at. All right. And for it to say width equal device width, that says basically use as much of the width as you possibly can. And you all know this. You've got a lot less width on a phone than you do on here. All right. But it's saying it doesn't matter whether it's landscape or portrait. Use 100%. Initial scaling means that just that. 1 means 100%. If you only wanted to use half the screen for some reason, you'd set it to 0.5. All right. Now, shrink to fit equal no. That has to do with, you know, again, depending on the site, how much you're going to let people use that, the pinch, you know, to make something bigger or smaller on their phone or on their device. So they give you some examples here, and they show you how something will look at different pixelated sizes. Notice that's width. That should make sense to you that 580 would be more than 412, so you can see how different it will look. All right, sizing fonts. If you look at the example there, when you specify the size of a font for a fluid layout, you should use ems or percentages or viewport heights and width. I use rems. Okay. The difference between an M and a rem is a rem bases it at basically at what's at the top of the page, what's defined on the top, where an M does it in the container where you currently are. If you don't get that, it's not that big a thing. A lot of times when you use an M or a rem, it doesn't really look much different to you. All right. You remember I gave you an article, a two-page article on M's versus rems earlier in the semester. All right. When you use these M's, rems, or percentages, it says the size you specify is relative to the size of the parent element. The default font size for most browsers is 16 pixels. All right. What that means is to say something like this, font size 100% says, for example, for, I don't know, for like a paragraph, it'll be 16 pixels. If you want it to be 24 pixels instead of 16, you make it 1.5 M's. Does that make sense? 16 plus half of 16 would be 8, and that's 24. You know, you can set something in pixels, px, but then it's always meant to be that size. When you set something in M's, it's meant to try to scale based on the device you're using. That's why it's recommended you use that. Yeah, an issue can arise with earlier versions of IE before IE10. All right, because IE in earlier versions was problematic. Scaling images, again, as the width of an element in a fluid design changes, you'll typically want the width of any image to change with it as well. In other words, you want it to scale. Sometimes what you see when you put the image in is sometimes you will see the max width set to 100%. Sometimes you'll see the width set to 100% and the max width set to a number. When I did it, all I had was just width 100% and it scaled. Sometimes it's a game where you got to play it. And that's why, again, you can have it, maybe you say in here, when I did the test, when we went over that the other day, it may have looked great or okay at least on what I was using, but I didn't bring up an emulator to see what it would look like on other devices. So as it says, to create a scalable image, remove any height and width attributes. You don't want those. All right? It used to be back in the olden days, like around the 2000s, when a person would put an image tag in, they would have like image, img, source equal, and they put that, alt equal, and they have that. Then they would have width equal and a number and height equal and a number. Some people still do that. But that number that you put in there is a pixel number. It's a px. All right, that doesn't scale. If you want to limit the size of an image to its native width, you can set the property to 1%, then set the max width in pixels. That way the quality will be maintained. And one thing, and I had to tell people this, again, we're going to talk about this. Don't worry about it right now because there's still plenty of time. But about halfway into the semester, we're going to have a period where we're going to talk about our portfolios. And when you have your portfolio, I've had people do this in the past. They put a picture in there, and instead of setting the width, etc., they just scale it where it looks really deformed, for lack of better words. So it's a lot wider than it should be, but they haven't maintained the height aspect ratio with the width. So it just looks bad. If you send that out and you have people look at that, that's what they'll remember about you. That's not what you want. All right. So next here on 296, a web page that uses a fluid design. Now, again, you might look at this and say, my God, they're making this uglier and uglier. And in some ways, I wouldn't have used their color combination. They did. Especially when you got a white background for your book, I would have made this at least, maybe made the background this color probably. And used it like that because I think it would have come out better. But they can do what they want to do. It's their book. So as it says, this web page that we just quickly looked at uses a fluid layout. Both the images are scalable. The font sizes are coded in M's. Those sizes don't change as the width of the browser changes. To change them, we need to use media queries. All right. As the width of the page is reduced, it becomes more difficult to use. So to fix this, that's the next thing. That's these media queries. All right. And again, this is something, for lack of better words, that was kind of invented so that when people started looking at web pages on different devices, they still look decent. And actually, you're not looking for decent. You want it to look good regardless of what device is being used. So the author says here, when you develop a website that uses RWD to provide for various screen sizes, you want to make sure it configures the viewport appropriately for mobile devices. All right, so how do we do that? Well, right now what they're saying is, here's a web page on a mobile device with and without a meta viewport element. Now that, you may not like that, but it's still readable. That isn't, unless you move. And I hopefully this is something I don't have to, you just know. But you should, if you were going to set up something for whatever reason, let's say you wanted to set this up. All right, I don't know why you do that, but let's just say you did. You should always make sure that the user, if they have to go and basically take and flick, that you have stuff flick where they flick left. They want it to go to the right. You know what I'm saying? Not to the left. And you want it to go down and not up. All right? Because otherwise it can be just too confusing for people. And if you're selling a product and other people are selling the same product, other companies, You don't want your website to be hard to use. Because if somebody gets frustrated and with the right person, what if it's a Walmart, okay, and they decide they're going to start selling something and you're one of the people they're considering. All right. If you make it too hard for them, they'll just go on to the next vendor. All right. So as it says, content properties for viewport metadata. These are all things that you can set. The only one that we did was width equals device width. That's usually the one that you set. All right, so the logical width, the logical height. A number that indicates the initial zoom factor, which again is 100%. The minimum and maximum, okay, and indicates whether the user can zoom in or zoom out of a viewport. And as it says, yes and no are basically your options. So this is how you create these. Let's look at one of these. Okay, this says, and almost always when you put a media query in there, they always start with @media, an @ sign and the word media in lowercase. Okay, and virtually 100% of the time, I've never seen it any other way. You put only screen. You could set something up for the printer, but with media queries, virtually always it's set up for the screen. Okay, and what this says is a max width of 767. So that means anything 767 pixels or less, this will apply to. Anything 768 or more pixels, it won't apply to. Does that make sense? All right, you're going to see this in just a couple minutes when we go over the example that I sent you. So as it says, a media query is defined by the media selector, specifies the type, all right, and if all the conditions are true, it'll apply that to the page. It says the screen size at which the media query changes is known as a breakpoint. All right, so there 767 is the breakpoint. So 0 technically to 767, it looks like this. 768 and beyond, it's going to look like this type of thing. All right, so here are some common media queries. These are the sizes. Now, one thing to realize is this book, to my knowledge, it's got a 2019 date on it, which means it was probably written in 2018. Okay? What that means is these may not be exact. All right? Or there might be some kind of a new tablet or whatever that you want to account for. That's why, as we said, you want to try to test this on a multiple number of different devices. So here's some. I'm not going to read them to you, but you can take a look at them in there. The numbers that I used are not the same as these numbers, but we could change them if we wanted to. All right. So these are some common ones for mobile first design. Notice mobile portrait, mobile landscape, tablet portrait, tablet landscape. When you think about the fact that over 50% of people who look at websites today are not using a laptop or a desktop. All right, I was watching this thing online last night, that was yesterday afternoon, and the guy was saying on there that most of his friends don't even have a computer anymore. He doesn't consider a tablet to be a computer. He said that virtually with most of his friends, everything they do is on their phone. If it's for some reason it's too hard to read, they use their tablet. All right. So these sizes become more and more important. All right. So it says one way to do this is to start with queries for larger devices and work your way down. The other way is to start with the smallest size devices and work your way up. It doesn't really matter. But the point is, when you're doing this, you should have some rhyme or reason. You shouldn't just throw some stuff out there and see what sticks type of an idea. All right. Now, the last part of the chapter, because there's not too much in here left, but the last part of the chapter is on this thing that's called Slick Nav Plugin. Now, I'm going to go back to the Rankin site, and I want to show you something. You see our menu up here? notice that when you get to a certain point, what happens to it? You get this. This is typically referred to with these 3 bars as a hamburger menu, because it supposedly looks like a hamburger. I've never seen it, but the hamburger part, but that's what they call it. And the idea is if I click here, it shows me the same stuff. But again, you can see when you look on here, that when we get to a certain point here, come on. See that? There's a breakpoint right there. All right. That's what the author is talking about in here. Now, typically when that's done, it's done with something that's called Bootstrap that we're going to get into in a few chapters. But one way that you can kind of simulate this without using Bootstrap is to use this plugin. It's a Jquery plugin. We're going to talk a little bit about Jquery. That's the focus of the second half of the class. But it's called Slick Nav. And when you look at it right here, it does the same kind of thing. See that? Makes the hamburger menu for you. Now to do this, and they give you the steps, it says to use this, you start by downloading a zip file from github.com, etc. And then unzip that file. Then after you unzip it, you should add the slicknav.css to your CSS folder and the jquery.slicknav.min.js to your JS folder. Did everybody hear that? Then you should make sure you're also linking to that slicknav.css and you're linking to the JS file. And they show you how to do that in here. I believe they do. All right. So it says, in addition to doing this, you also have to add Jquery. Now, I think I've shown you this before, but I'm going to show it again anyway. I'm going to go out to jquery.com. All right. Now, it says here, again, ugly website, in my opinion, for whatever that's worth. There it is. All right, download Jquery. Yeah. So it's going to say, okay, you're going to download Jquery. First of all, what version do you want? This has changed since the last time I was out here. It used to have version 1, that went up to a certain number, version 2 that went up to a certain number, and then version 3. And the reason that they allowed version 1 and version 2 is that accounted for earlier versions of IE. They're basically trying to kickstart people and to say, if you got an older version, upgrade. Get Edge at a minimum. All right? But the point is, notice what we have here. It says download the compressed version and download the uncompressed. Everybody see this? First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click the link here that says download the compressed version. Okay? Now, you might look at that and say that doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense. That file is what's been called minified. So there was a tool that was run on that file that removed any extraneous white space from the file. All right, why is that important? Because if you're going to provide Jquery for people and you use the minified version, typically it's going to be only half the size and sometimes a lot less than the uncompressed version. And if somebody has to download a file, it's going to take some time. All right, but so by minifying things like this, you can have it download faster. All right. Now, the other reason for downloading the minified version, you don't want anybody to touch this file. This is Jquery. You can go and make your own additions to it, but you do that in your file. You don't do that in this file. But sometimes people look at this and they're like, I get what you're saying, but that makes no sense to me. So you click the other one that says uncompressed. This is the same file, but notice it's been uncompressed. So it's got all of that in it. All right. So you can copy either one to your JavaScript folder and use it. You can call it what you want to. People typically call it jquery.js for the one like this, and the other one I showed you, jquery.min.js, to show that it's minified. All right. But you don't even have to do that, because the other thing that you can do is you can use what's called a CDN. A CDN is a content delivery network. What that means is rather than you downloading Jquery, you can provide a hyperlink to Jquery on the internet someplace, and it'll be downloaded from there. The advantage of doing that is you always get the newest one. All right. The disadvantage of doing it like that, you need an internet connection. So if somebody is stuck someplace without an internet connection, it's not going to work. But if you download Jquery yourself, all right, and there's no internet connection, it'll still work. So a lot of times what people will do is they will download it, but they'll put some JavaScript code in that says, hey, if I've got an internet connection, use that one, and if I don't, use this one, type of an idea. But notice, so here's some CDNs. And you say, well, what are they? Well, I'll go to Google CDN. There it is. You just have to add this. That brings Jquery in, the newest version, 3.5.1. Again, the advantage of clicking when you do this and choosing it like this is you always get the latest version. All right? And here's the other versions I mentioned to you that handle older versions of Internet Explorer. All right? So that's how you're going to have to do that. And I believe, I'm probably making too big a thing out of it because they explain it in here a little bit at least. All right? But there is an exercise. I think one of the exercises you do in here uses this. And I will check before the end of the period today, but I believe you're asked to do something like this for your next test. All right? So this is what we're adding here. There's the link to the SlickNav CSS file. That one you have to copy in. This is the script tags that you will use. All right? And what's nice is you'll have to add code like this, and all this says is make SlickNav available to my mobile menu. Okay? I've either made it too easy or I made it too hard for you. Again, this is the last few pages of the chapter. Take a look at what's in there, please. All right? So the chapter ends with a web page that uses responsive web design. They show you the design of the page. Now again, when you do this, when you look right here, notice how the menu has changed. That menu is now a SlickNav plugin menu. All right? And notice you still have the heading and the subheading. You still have the fossil threads, etc., and the picture. And underneath it, it looks like here at least you get that text. Probably it's here. This may or may not be here. If you want it there, typically that would go at the bottom of the page. But this is always something as a web developer, and you're going to see this next week when we talk about Flexbox. All right? You might have something that's set up like this. You might have a website. I'm just going to draw a quick picture on the board. And if you imagine, up here, there's your header. Down here, there's your footer. Okay? So in between is your main content area. You might have it set up where, as an example, this is your left aside, this is your right aside, and this, we'll just call it our main content area. That make sense to everybody? All right. But when you squish your page down, what you want when it's on a phone is you want it to look like your header. Then underneath that, you want your main content area. Then you want your left aside. Then you want your right aside. Then you want your footer. Does that make sense? All right. Especially if somebody is looking at it on a very small phone. That's what we're talking about doing in here. That's what they're starting to show you here in this chapter. All right. So as they oftentimes do, after they do this, they show you the HTML for the page. Notice they called their navbar mobile menu. That's why earlier when they showed you this, and it said mobile menu right there. See this? Where I've got the mouse going? That is got to be the same name as what you actually call your nav bar. That's your menu. Notice in here, that's basically what's new in here, is adding that. Then they give you the CSS. Now there's more to that, mainly because if you'll start to look in here, yeah, they've got a max width of pixels, but virtually everything else they're using in here are percentages and M's. Now, you say, oh, this isn't. Yeah, again, notice they've got a min and a max width. Sometimes you do still want to use, you want to make sure something is at least this big all the time. Or at least, no more than this small type of thing. So then you can use absolute measurements. So the CSS that controls the layout, this is kind of an important thing, and I showed you this yesterday. This display none gets to be really important when you start working with different screen sizes. Display none basically means not only make it invisible, but for lack of better words, remove it. It's not technically gone, but it's shoved so far into the background that you can't see it, type of an idea. All right? And then you can make stuff display when it's, so in other words, it says hide the mobile menu initially. So if you're, I don't want to see that mobile menu if I'm looking at this on my laptop. I want to see the regular menu. Only when you hit a certain point do you want it to show. So again, here are your media queries. And please look at this. I want you to understand. Notice where it says media only, screen width, and max width. So as it says for tablets, it starts here like this. And notice there's a curly. But then each one of the things that you want to put in. So there's the nav menu, curly, curly. Mobile menu, curly, curly. Slick nav, curly, curly. Body, curly here, curly there, etc. And then you need an ending. I don't know if it goes on to the next page or not, but you need an ending curly brace at the end. See, people do that. Mine doesn't work, and I don't know why. For every left curly you put in there, you need a right curly. All right. So here's some more of it. Okay. And that's it. Now, we are going to take a break, but before we do, okay, I want to very quickly go over with you this thing that I showed you before. All right? I'm trying to figure out why it's got me in landscape. There it is. Okay, so notice I'm here, and I'll show you the pixels in just a minute. When I reach a certain point, I go to normal. What I said normal is basically the way that you probably see it quite often on a laptop. All right? But when I get down, now I'm in tablet size. When I get down more, come on. Well, it's not letting me shrink down any further, and I don't know why. But when I get down even more, and it should, it'll get down to smartphone size. So there. It's not letting me shrink down. I don't know why. So let's quickly just take a look at this. This is the entire HTML file, all on one screen. By now, I should not have to mention to you what this means, what this means, what this means. That should make sense to all of you. All right. I know that a couple of you had earlier in the semester had problems with your code. You never put any actual HTML that you want to show on the screen. That only goes in the body tag. All right. But I had people who had divs up in their head section. The system does not know how to handle that. The head section is for stuff that doesn't appear on the web page itself. All right. So this chapter was basically talking about everything that's involved directly or indirectly with this. All right. The title now, I think everybody knows what that means. This is the link, and we're going to look at this in just a minute, to the associated style sheet. And this is the whole body. Widescreen, normal, tablet, smartphone, and landscape. And guess what? At the beginning, they're all H1s, right? You can see that. At the beginning, what we say in our CSS is hide every H1 there is. Then look at the width of your screen and set the color based on the size of your screen and set the tag, the H1, to widescreen, normal, tablet, smartphone, or landscape based on the size of the screen. All right, and the way that that's done, so these are global settings. Now notice what I'm starting to do here. You don't have to do it like this. If you think, oh my God, what you did looks ugly, then don't do it that way. But I really tried to break things up so you could see what went with what. So this says the body, I'm always going to have a font family of Arial. All right. If you can't find Arial, Helvetica, otherwise give me a sans serif. I want the font size to basically be 24 points. All right. I want my background to be gray, and technically that's never going to be gray because it's always going to be one of those colors I showed you. All right. I want my text color to always be white, so I needed to make sure I never made the background color of my screen white, because white text on a white background, you wouldn't see it. All right. I wanted the text that was there to align in the center, and I wanted a little bit of padding just so I had some placement of it on the screen. Now, again, so you remember this. If I didn't want to use 100 pixels here, I could have said 6.25 either rems or ems. Because I'm multiplying 6.25 by 16 gives me 100. All right. So again, initially, don't display any H1 headers. But come in with your media queries. So notice how I broke up my media queries. You've got this code. This is the first email that I sent you today. All right. So when we look in here, here's the media query for widescreen. So for 1201 pixels and above, here we do use absolute measurements. So for 1201 pixels, basically, and above, I want the background to be black, and I want you to show that heading. Remember, that heading was hidden. So to say display block means basically show it then. However, if I'm between 769 pixels and 1200 pixels, make sure you don't put the same number on on two of these. So 1200 and above, 1201 and above, 769 to 1200. Make sense? All right. The background's green, and show that heading. For tablets, anywhere between 501 pixels and 768. Again, that was 769. Navy, and make it block. Smartphones, the max width of 500. So that's as narrow as it can possibly be. I've never seen anything more narrow than probably 200 pixels. Even that's really, really narrow. All right. Up till 500. So again, that one started at 501. Make the background pink. And here was to handle landscape. If you remember before I was in landscape mode, that's why it was red all the time. It still showed that stuff, but it showed it in red. All right. All right. And the last thing I want to mention to you, so we're going to be done in 5 minutes, is again, as I mentioned to you before, and I'm going to show you, this is the stuff that I sent you. First thing is, where is it? Come on. I found this, I don't know if you'd call it, not exactly cute, for lack of better words, but I got sent this yesterday. It's called the A through Z of web development. Okay? And it's from dzone.com. This is one of those sites I showed you a week or so ago, or a few days ago. You go out to dzone.com, you might want to do this, you might not, and you can sign up for a free account. Okay? And I just thought this was interesting because a lot of the stuff that's in here, A is for Ajax and accessibility and API, B is for browser, C, etc. But a lot of this is stuff that we cover in this program here. Okay? If you say, I don't care, then don't look at it. All right? Virtually all of the rest of the articles that I'm giving you in here. So before we take our break, I know I'm pushing you a little longer today, but this will be it for the lecture. Let's quickly look. There was another one I wanted to send to you, and it was on how to create a menu using CSS, but it was 32 meg. So it was too big to send to you. All right, so let's see. So the homework then, we went over the stuff yesterday for Chapter 7. The homework for Chapter 8, once it comes up, is going to be this. Starting on page 304, build a responsive menu with a slick Nav plugin. And it tells you all the steps that you should go through in order to do that. If you do that, and you at least attempt that, by next Tuesday, if you're asked to do that on a test, it should be a piece of cake. You could probably just grab your code that you did and make modifications to it. So that is the sole homework, is just that one problem. And then for the lab for Chapter 8, again, you're going to be working on that shape up thing. Continue with the shape up project, chapters 7 through 9, and the Chapter 8 exercises at the end of the book. So it is about 9:05. So you've got 2 hours and 50 minutes today. You have 3 hours and 50 minutes tomorrow, or whatever it is, and Monday. So if you were behind, that should give you enough time to catch up. I'm not planning on, unless something big comes up that I have to share with you, talking. I'm not planning on talking anymore today. I'm not planning on talking at all tomorrow. And I'm not planning on talking at all on Monday. Tomorrow, when I come in here, just so you know, when I come in here, the first thing I plan on doing is grading your tests. So that by the time you leave here tomorrow, I will give you your tests to look at. And as before, give them back to me before you leave. All right? And then on Monday, I hope to have everything graded that's turned in through maybe Sunday at noon or whatever. All right? You could email me stuff on weekends too. All right? Like I think I told you yesterday, I am going to be doing a lot of grading this weekend. It's just me and my dog. All right? Not even my dog, it's the dog. All right. So, questions on anything we went over yesterday or today? Anything? And again, the test then right now will be Tuesday of next week. Format will be very similar. Then again, next Wednesday, Chapter 9, which is Flexbox, and I'm going to give you another one of these exercise things. Thursday, and I hope they have, because that I haven't finished yet, we'll go over CSS Grid. All right? If you want more, too, on responsive web design, I just want to show you, I've shown you some of this stuff already, but I'm going to go out to YouTube, and a guy that I use a lot, 2 people I'm going to show you. The first is Brad Traversy, and I'm going to put in here responsive design. Build an HTML5 website with responsive design. Build a responsive grid CSS, from scratch, etc. The other guide, or the other thing that I use, is the thing that's out here that's basically, it's called Web Dev Simplified. All right, it's a young guy, his name is Kyle, and I think that he said he's quit his job and he does this full time. He puts out stuff for free and he puts out stuff that's not free. All right, so if I look through here, my guess is someplace in here, that he's got something. I don't know where it'll be. Responsive landing page tutorial. Responsive navbar tutorial. Learn media queries in 7 minutes. Some of the stuff that he has on here, some of these lectures can be up to 20 or 30 minutes long. Most of them are somewhere in between 5 and 20 minutes. All right. Again, you never have to look at it. But sometimes, you might learn more from listening to somebody else than you do from me. Okay? All right. That's all I've got then.